designs implementation models to be used as roadmaps for blood donor centers and transfusion services, facility accreditation processes, and quality system improvements. She has experience as an assessor for AABB and a CAP inspector, over 25 years of management experience in clinical laboratories, blood donor centers. It's a huge number of years, and hospital-based transfusion services. And during her years as CEO and senior management, she has led organizations through strategic planning accreditation processes. She holds a certificate in organizational leadership from Harvard University, a Bachelor of Science in Biology from Purdue, and certifications in medical technology and immunology from ASCP. She's member of American Association of Blood Banks, ASCP, ASQ, and CLSI. Welcome, a warm welcome, Christine. And over to now, Christine.
All righty. All right.
And stop.
Yeah. All right.
You can start share.
All righty. There we are. Well, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to any of you besides me that's in the United States. It's a very big pleasure of mine to be here with all of you again. Some old faces, some new faces, and I'm very excited to present education opportunities regarding the AABB fundamental standards for blood collection and transfusion. These are the foundations of the quality certificate program, a program that was a collaboration of both AATM, ATM, and AABB. Many years in coming, but we are really glad we were able to launch the program back in 2021. So today I'm going to get started on explaining a little bit about who is AABB, and I want to talk about why quality is important, the concept of a quality management system, the standards that I mentioned and their quality system essentials, which are the skeleton of all AABB standards. I want to talk about how you can demonstrate that you've implemented the standards by providing you suggestions of evidence. And then again, I'll give you some particulars about the quality certificate program. So we have learning objectives. I want you to be able to know quality management as the foundation to blood center operations. Your quality system, it will, as it matures and is implemented, it will allow you to operate your blood center, your transfusion services in a manner that takes donor and patient safety as the utmost, and so that we have great patient outcomes. I want to identify you will be able to identify the AABB fundamental standards, and you're going to describe what a quality management system is. And I want you to be able to understand ways to implement these standards as the foundation of the quality certificate program. All of you probably know this, but I'll just quickly cite who AABB is. We're an international not-for-profit association. We have both individual members and also institutions, those institutions that are accredited by AABB. AABB, they're involved in transfusion medicine and biotherapies. And our AABB is committed to improving health through the development and delivery of standards, accreditation, educational programs, and this program such as the quality certificate. And we focus on optimizing patient and donor care and safety. We have our membership includes physicians, nurses, scientists, researchers, administrators, medical technologists, and many other healthcare providers. Our membership is located in more than 80 countries, and we have accredited institutions in over 50 countries. So let's get into what is a quality system. Well, it's defined a few different ways. The quality system is the organizational structure. That's what I meant, the foundation. It's the responsibilities, procedures, and processes and resources for implementing your quality management. It's an organized approach to managing multiple complex processes and systems. And it's what your organization does to ensure that your products and your services conform to customer requirements. And your customers are your donors and your patients, and also the treating clinicians. So let's look at the model as its framework. Your operational processes, and that's your collections, your manufacturing process, your testing, distribution, and transfusion. Those are your operations. How are they supported? They're supported by the quality system essentials, and that is organization, your resources, equipment, supplier and customer, process control, which is your down in there, all your operations, documents and records, deviations, nonconformances, assessments, process improvement, facilities, and safety. These arrows show that these QSEs support the operational processes of a blood center transfusion service. And why? Why would you want to implement a quality system? Well, you want donor, product, and patient safety. We consider that vein to vein, all from the starts at the donor and ends with the transfusion to the patient. You want efficiencies. You need to have operational efficiencies so that you conserve your good, valuable resources. You want to look at your customer demand because they're going to demand consistency and excellence. Product efficacy. You want your products to treat as they are designed to be a treatment because blood is an essential medicine. You want to look at your regulatory requirements from your competent authority to make sure you are in compliance. You want to institute good manufacturing practices from the time that you meet the donor all the way to your transfusing the patient. And a quality management system is required by the AABB standard 1.2 quality system. And we'll show that when we get into the standards. So what is a standard? Well, it's an imperative statement. It's always stated as a positive rather than a negative. Your standard, remember, is your goal. It's not how you get there. That's your methods. So there are many ways to meet the intent of the standard. A standard is also scientifically based. It's clinically sound. It's unambiguous requirements that provide the basis for this quality certificate program. Minimal requirements that may be exceeded in practice. Your standards can be minimal and you can always exceed them, but you can't ever do less than the intent of the standard. So again, what is a standard? It's always stated as a shall. And how are these standards developed? Well, they're based on new data, regulatory initiatives and changes in the standard of care. And we also have input from our membership and the public. They're consensus standards. What is the difference between guidance and standards? Well, again, your standard is your goal. It's the what you do. Your guidance contains methods of meeting that goal, how you're going to do it. And in this quality certificate program, your specialist that you will be paired with reviews your self-assessment documents, and which these documents demonstrate conformance with the standards. And the question we asked, does the facility meet the goal? The fundamental standards contain requirements that can be implemented by blood banks and transfusion services. And a requirement that contains the word shall indicates that the statement is mandatory. So again, a standard has the statement shall, and it is mandatory. The fundamental standards, a little background on them, they were developed on good medical practice, scientific, and evidence-based data. They were developed by the Global Standards Committee at AABB, and there are membership from all over the world in that committee. Dr. Chowdhury sits on the committee for the global standards. The requirements in the fundamental standards can be followed by a blood bank or a transfusion service anywhere in the world, but they never preempt your national, state, or provincial and local laws and regulations. The competent authority is the ultimate regulatory body. These fundamentals are not intended, though, as a substitute for legal advice. Users, you must make your own determination as to how to best to ensure compliance with all your applicable laws and your requirements, including consulting legal counsel familiar with these issues should you need to. So here we are, the ABB Quality Certificate Program. It's the fundamental standard. It's based on the fundamental standards for blood collection and transfusion. And again, the quality system essentials. This is a process flow for the application all the way through awarding of the certificate. So if you're interested as a blood bank or transfusion service, you contact ABB through our website, and then you give us the indication that you want to apply for the certificate program. Then you will be assigned an AATM number, and the emails in the facility and we email the facility your application document that you will complete and return to us. We want to know information about your service. Then you will receive an invoice, and the payment is sent to AABB. At that time, you're assigned a quality upon completion of the invoice and payment. You're assigned a quality specialist to work with you all the way throughout the process. And we always have a kickoff meeting that we go through the process, show you the documents, and then introduce you to the quality specialist. You will receive a number of documents, such as the self-assessment tool. That is the framework of the quality certificate program. You will get guidance documents telling you how to complete it, and a completion schedule that both you and the quality specialists agree to. It's usually about up to 15 weeks. So it gives you 3 months to gather your documents, go back and forth, and submit them per the schedule. And then once you complete the self-assessment tool and you've sent in all your documents, they're all reviewed by the specialist, and if everything is great and the information is accepted, then you are awarded the quality certificate. We have a little award ceremony via Zoom, and then you will also receive both an electronic version of the certificate and a paper hard copy. But if you, along the way, if you find you need extra time and you need to change the schedule, that's very acceptable. It's a very flexible program, and we want you to be successful to succeed. So these are the forms I mentioned that you're going to be getting. Again, the documentation guide. There's a guide for how to use the self-assessment tool. There's a Schedule A for submission of the assessment tool, and there's a guide on the self-assessment itself. So this self-assessment, the quality certificate self-assessment, is your facilities practice. It determines that your facilities practices are in conformance with the current edition of the ABB Fundamental Standards for Blood Collection and Transfusion. And these standards are internationally recognized. And this is also, it's an acknowledgement that your facility is on the path for quality and blood safety for both your donors and your patients. The objectives of the program in summary. We provide an opportunity for you to examine your processes and your procedures against these world-renowned standards, and to promote the highest levels of quality and safety for donors and patients. And really, one of the best features of the program, we want to provide an educational experience for you and your staff. We want everyone in the facility to be involved. This is a group effort in going through your self-assessment, and we encourage you to activate every one of your staff members as a participant. We want then, when you're awarded the certificate, you're going to receive international recognition for advanced blood safety and quality efforts. And those are the main objectives of our program. So now let's learn about the standards, because you're going to use these standards as the foundation to the quality certificate program. So 1.0, organization. And what does that translate to? What does it mean? Well, you want to define and document who is in charge of what. And it's going to demonstrate the relationship of all the individuals in your facility, who they report to, how they work together. That is, in a nutshell, 1.0 organization. So what are some suggestions of the evidence that you've implemented 1.0? Well, a key feature is your organogram. Now, is it accurate and is it up to date? Does it define the quality function in your organization? 1.1 describes executive management, and you shall, as it's a standard, have defined executive management. Your executive management shall have the responsibility and authority for the blood bank for transfusion services operations, the authority to establish or make changes to the quality system, and the responsibility for compliance with these fundamental standards and applicable local laws, state and national, and regulations. So translation for this of executive management. Your quality starts at the top. Management is responsible for your operations, creating and changing the quality system, ensuring standards and regulations are met, and you must ensure that your quality system is actually working and effective. So 1.2, this is the standard I referenced previously. This is the standard that mandates that you must have a quality system that's defined, documented, implemented, and maintained. And everyone should be trained on its application of the quality system. So you must have evidence of training. So what does that mean? Translation. Create a quality plan document. Train all staff on the plan and the supporting policies, SOPs, and processes. Use the quality system essentials, the QSEs, as the foundation of your quality system. Build on them. So evidence, what can you show as evidence of implementation? Well, your management reviews. You're going to have scheduled management reviews of the quality system. You define the schedule, but you must show that you have these management reviews and they must be documented. Results of your internal and external assessments that you're doing as evidence that you've implemented a quality system. Your error management and your outcomes. Process improvement efforts, that's all part of your quality system. And getting your customer feedback and acting on it and demonstrating that you collect and act on feedback. So any changes to the quality system are as a result of these reviews. You reviewed for effectiveness and you find you need to make a change. That is evidence that you've implemented your quality system. So now we're going to 1.3, policies, processes, and procedures. So again, they shall be developed and implemented to ensure that the requirements of the fundamentals are satisfied. And they shall be in writing or captured electronically and shall be followed. So what does that mean? Your translation. If it isn't in writing, it didn't exist. If it is in writing, it must be followed as you write it. If it's not followed as written, you have to be justified and you must pre-approve by the medical director on a case-by-case basis. There are times when you need to make an adjustment to your process, and then you do it ahead of time. The medical director says this is okay, and you do it, you document, and you have that evidence. So what is the evidence that you've implemented a standard? Well, these policies, processes, and procedures address all the elements to the standards, and your personnel follow these SOPs as written, and you see that when you're doing your self assessments or internal audits, because you're going to see if everyone's following the SOPs. And you've got documentation that if you have to deviate from your PPPs, that prior to the deviation, you've approved it, because that, as long as you have approval prior to, and you justify why you must deviate, of course you can. Now 1.4, we all been through 2 years of a pandemic, so emergency preparedness is very, very important. And you're going to have emergency operation policies, processes, and procedures. You have to respond to the effects of internal and external disasters and be prepared to do so. Now we're up to Standard and Quality System Essential 2.0. These are those resources. You're going to have policies, processes, and procedures to ensure the provision of adequate resources. You have adequate resources to perform, verify, and manage all your activities. So when we talk about resources, what do we mean? Here's the translation. You have to have good people to do the job, and you need to make sure they can do the job correctly with all they need to be effective. So you have to give them the tools. And what does that mean? Well, evidence is You've got written job descriptions for all your positions, including the qualifications for the positions. You have like a signature list, or electronic or written, that includes all the individuals performing and reviewing critical steps. So you always need to identify who is doing what and when. That's the foundation of GMPs. Your documentation of all the training for your activities performed. You need to have training plans and documented training for your staff. And also, once you've trained them, you must ensure that they are competent to do their job. So let's talk more about personnel training. I mentioned training plans. You have to have it for new employees. How do you train incumbents on new procedures? These might differ. Evaluations of training. Was your training effective? And your competency assessments. What's forms of competency assessments? Well, and we don't see, as you know, the standard just says you shall have them, but we don't tell you how. The goal is to have them. The methodology is yours. Well, you can do direct observation of performance. You monitor and record and reporting of test results. So you're going to look at the test results that the staff have produced. Are they accurate? You got a review of your worksheets, your QC records, your proficiency testing results, and your preventive maintenance records. Those are all documents that staff are competent if they do those accurately. You want direct observation of instrument maintenance and function checks. Testing of previously analyzed specimens. You can give when you know the result, and you can give it to multiple staff to see if they all come up with the same result. And then you have an assessment of problem-solving skills for your staff. You can give them a little test when you give them a problem and see how well they do in resolution. So again, I must stress, trained does not equal competent. You train, but then you must show evidence that they're competent to do, that they've took the training, they've converted it into how they do their job, and they do it accurately and without error. That's when you know they're competent. Now we're getting into the equipment of your organization. And this is
Christine, can I interrupt for a second?
Yes.
You may be also tired speaking continuously. So can you ask our participants for the previous 2 chapters, what are the documents they have learned, that documents they have to produce? Some sorts, if you can ask them there, they have some questions in these 2 chapters.
We were going to do questions at the end, but I guess we can do them now. I can't, someone wants to tell me the questions, I can answer them.
Yeah. Anybody has got any questions? Because this is just an interactive session. Any of the participants, and do you know that standard has got some symbol like a pen? And what does it mean, the pen? That means you need a document to be written. So do you think that whatever Christine has said for the previous 2 chapters, you have got all the documents, or you need some assistance from Christine in these 2 chapters she has just finished? Anybody? I think it's clear to everybody, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, what the suggestions are for the evidence of implementation. I usually do 3rd. I can go back and show you right here, evidence of implementation. This talks about the documents that you'll need, and this is on resources. So when you're on the standard 2.0, your written job descriptions, those are evidence of implementation. And in those job descriptions, as I mentioned, you have to have the qualifications of the staff that are doing that particular job. Another sample is the signature list. So again, you have to know who is performing and reviewing critical steps. And then all your training that you do must be documented. So with your training plans, if you're having a lecture training, you have to keep a roster. That's a form of documentation. Then the people that participated. And then after you've trained them, then you've got to document their competency. And these are samples of how you may do a competency, direct observation, and all the other examples. So those are the type of documentation that will show that you have evidence of implementing Standard 2.0 as resources. And we've talked about that.
Yeah.
All right. Are we ready to move on to equipment? And I'll stop at the end of each one and ask for a question then, if that's the way you'd like to do it, Dr. Chowdhury. All right, so now we're up to Standard 3.0, and that is all about the equipment in your facility. And this, you have to identify equipment that's critical to the provision of blood, components, and services. So by identifying that equipment, that demonstrates that it's critical to these operations. And you need to have policies and processes and procedures to ensure that calibration, maintenance, and the monitoring of equipment will conform to these fundamentals and to other specified requirements. If you have, as I mentioned, local, regional, or national laws around equipment specifications, you must comply to those as well. So what does that mean? A 3.0 on equipment. Well, good products, good services, and good reports, testing reports require good equipment. But good equipment doesn't happen by accident. You have to define, so you're going to look at all the way from the beginning, before you purchase. You must define your criteria before you purchase it. What is the equipment? What are your needs? What is the piece of equipment going to do for your facility? It's a critical piece of equipment. Then you're going to have to qualify that equipment before you use it. You're going to develop your plan. You're going to prepare an installation qualification, or IQ. And in that, you look at, was it set up per manufacturer's instructions? Now, the manufacturer usually helps you with the install, but you have to make sure that it's signed off, that you have all the right signatures, and that you and the manufacturer agree upon the installation. Next, you would have an operational qualification. Now, does this piece of equipment work as the manufacturer described? That's what you're going to test when you do the OQ. Now, the last piece of the performance of the qualification is performance qualification. Now, does that piece of equipment make the expected product or provide the expected result in your environment? That's why the performance qualification is so important. You must ensure that the equipment performs as the manufacturer said in your environment. So all three are very important to qualify equipment: IQ, OQ, and PQ. Now, this validation, does it ensure equipment works in your environment with your procedures? So that's the principles of why you qualify and validate your equipment. Now, what's some evidence for that? What are you going to show that you've implemented 3.0? You have a defined process for equipment selection. Your new equipment, you have a qualification plan, and you've carried it out as it was written. Remember, you got to write it beforehand, you have to get it approved, and then you implement the qualification plan. And process validated prior to use. Again, your process, do your IQ, OQ, PQ as it was written and as it was approved. And then you must uniquely identify all your critical equipment. So you have to, one evidence of that would be a master equipment list with a unique piece of a unique number identifying each piece of equipment. For example, you might have multiple scales, but you need to know which scale or multiple centrifuges that you use on processing that batch. This is all part of good manufacturing processes. So we go into 3.5, equipment. This is monitoring and maintenance. Remember, you need to monitor your equipment and maintain it. So you should develop a process. What are you going to check on your piece of equipment to make sure it's functional? How often are you going to do this? What are acceptable results after you have on your maintenance? And what do you do when the results are unacceptable? You got to have a plan. You know, equipment isn't perfect and it can break down and it won't stay in calibration or QC. So how do you have to have a plan on what you're going to do when that happens? So when you calibrate, you're going to calibrate before you use it, as needed, at defined intervals, and safeguards to prevent authorized adjustments. So again, this calibration schedule will be according to the manufacturer's recommendations. 3.5, more on 3.5. So poorly maintained equipment may make bad products. So you need to have a process to evaluate your products, remove equipment from service when it's not functioning, and making sure everyone knows that it's removed from service and they can't use it. You need to investigate the malfunction or the failure. You need to report it as necessary. And you need to requalify your equipment once you've done any maintenance on it or corrections. So you know that it's ready to use and it is in spec. So what's some evidence, documents of this? Your preventive maintenance schedule, and you define it, and then you follow, and it follows manufacturer's recommendations, and that you actually perform the maintenance. Documentation of preventive maintenance that follows the schedule. You define your acceptable results and any follow-up for unacceptable results. That's documentation that shows you've implemented the standard. So here you have more on equipment. Equipment also includes your storage devices for blood components, and reagents. Storage devices shall have the capacity and the design to ensure that proper temperature is maintained. And the storage temperature of refrigerators, freezers, and platelet incubators shall be monitored. So you must monitor your storage devices so that they keep temperature 24/7. Additional equipment, well, we have 3.7. This is the alarms that will alert you that the storage devices for blood and blood components shall have alarms and shall conform to standards 3.7.1 and standard 3.7.2. Now, your information system is also considered a critical equipment. So under 3.9 information systems, you have to maintain all your records. If your information system is not functioning, you have an alternative system and you must maintain that and test it. Personnel responsible for management of the information system are also responsible for its compliance. And there shall be processes and procedures to support managing the system. So you're going to have SOPs on how you use it and how you manage it. And your system to support unauthorized access must be established and followed. You can't have unauthorized individuals accessing critical equipment in your information system that is private, such as donor information, test results, component information. So you must prevent unauthorized access. And you're going to need a process to be in place to ensure that there's a minimized data breach. So you need to make sure you have some process that you're going to ensure that you don't have a data breach or that you can prevent it. All right, so before I go on, are there any questions regarding the equipment standards, regarding qualification, validation, storage, etc.? And if you do have a question, please put them in the chat and we can get to them as soon as we need to. Okay, but I'm going to move on. We're on the next standard, which is 4.0, and that's supplier and customer issues. So you shall have a process a policy, a process, and a procedures to evaluate the ability of your suppliers of critical equipment and materials, to evaluate them, to make sure that they are sending you materials that are under your specifications, or equipment, or any services, such as if a testing laboratory is going to test for your other donors, that you have evaluated their ability to consistently meet and agreed upon the requirements. So and many times, if you're in a hospital, there is a procurement area that is responsible for these contracts. But you and the blood bank are responsible to make sure that they consistently meet your requirements. So you'll have to work with your procurement department if you are not they're directly involved with those contracts. You need to have some relationship to ensure that these contracts meet your needs. And how do we do that? Well, let's see. There's incoming receipt and inspection and testing. So when a supplier fails to meet your requirements, you report that to your competent authority, contracting authority, and procurement, or both. So you have to notify, say if it's a procurement area, or even your competent authority in the province, the region, the national, that this supplier is not meeting their requirements that they had agreed to meet. And that each container used for collection, preservation, and storage of blood and blood components has to be inspected. So you're going to inspect each of those, and to ensure that it's meeting the requirements. And all these critical materials shall meet specified requirements. So you're going to have to know your requirements, you're going to have to inspect, and then you're going to report when that doesn't occur. So what does that really mean? Well, these good products require good suppliers. So for blood bag supplier, you have problems with your platelet products because the air permeable bags, there's a problem with. Or when you freeze your plasma and you're getting multiple incidences of it cracking the plastic, those are issues that you need to report to your supplier. And if it's a procurement department, you want to let them know too, because they're not keeping to upholding their contract. And so good suppliers must consistently provide good materials and service. Sure, you can have one batch that might be bad, but that's your relationship with your supplier, and that you have conversations about it. And you're responsible for picking good suppliers. If you have to influence and talk to your procurement department, if you are not the end, you don't have the total authority, but you have to be active in the selection process. So what's some evidence that you've implemented the standard, some documentation? Well, here, you have a list of your critical supplies. We talked about a master equipment list. Well, this is also another master list, your critical supplies, that you know them, you list them, and that you're keeping track of those critical supplies. You have a written process to report unsatisfactory performance. So you write a procedure on how you're going to report it, when you're going to report it, and then what you're going to do after you report it. Then you also have records of the receipt, records that you've inspected the materials and supplies as they come in, and that you test critical materials before use, such as your testing reagents. You're going to QC them before use. So that's all evidence that you've implemented the standard on supplier and customer issues. Do we have any questions before I get into process control on supplier and customer? Okay, well, if you'd like to, honey, hold, and we can always go back at the end and we can hold your questions if you think of a question or something triggers it along the way. So we'll have time at the end also for questions. So now we're going to talk about the very large area, and we call it an AABB process control, or standard 5.0 QSE 5.0. And this is all about your operations. So you're going to have policies, processes, and procedures that ensure the quality of blood components and services. And you're going to ensure that these PPPs are carried out under controlled conditions, thus process control, that you control your operations. So what does that mean to you? Well, good policies, processes, and procedures lead to good products, reports, test report results, and services. You need to make sure your processes and your procedures work right before you implement them. So you're going to validate and qualify and make sure they work before you implement them and standard practices. You need to have consistent implementation, and that's going to lead to consistent products, reports, and services. So this is all about having process control and having your operations into controlled conditions. So what does that mean? Again, another way of defining. You need a means of measuring and verifying input and output. So you need to understand your personnel, the method that you're using, the equipment that you're using, your materials, and your environment. All those areas need to have a measurement and a verification. So what's some suggestions that show you've implemented this? You have defined process for developing, validating, and implementing new or changed processes and procedures. So if you're getting a new, you have a new procedure, you need to understand how you're going to implement it, what the effects are going to be before you implement the new procedure. So you need to have documentation of a validated process or procedure, that you validate your procedures before you use them. And sometimes that validation is part of your training, that the people, your staff read them, they understand them before they actually are put into use. The dates of validation, review, and training, all these dates must precede your implementation. So you have to prove it, validate it, review it, train on it, then you implement in that order. So that's some general elements about process control before we get into the donor, the processing, testing, and issue. Well, now this is the area that talks about your quality control, 5.1.1. So you must have a program of quality control. You must establish it, and that is sufficiently comprehensive to ensure all reagents, equipment, and methods that you're using perform as you expect them to perform. Quality control failures shall be investigated before the release of test results, product, or services. So if you fail QC, that blood product must stay in your control and not be issued until you've investigated and then resolved the quality control failure. 5.1.2, this is use of your materials. This means the containers, solutions used for collection, processing, preserving, and storage of blood and blood components and all testing reagents. You must store them and use them in accordance with the manufacturer's written instructions, and they shall meet your specified requirements. So that's the standard about the use of material. And then sterility. Sterility is very important. You must use aseptic methods shall be employed to minimize the risk of microbial contamination of blood and blood components. That starts with your donor and your arm scrub to your making sure you collect in a closed system and all the aseptic methods that you use to prevent any contamination. So what's some evidence that you've implemented quality control? You have defined quality control processes. So you have to define them. When you're going to do them, how you're going to do them, and what is the result that you expect? How do you pass QC? And then for a selected reagent, a piece of equipment, or a method, can your personnel describe the quality control they're doing? Do they understand it? Have they been trained in it? Does your practice, what they're doing, reflect the SOP that you wrote? And do the records of quality control reflect your SOP and practice? So again, do what you say you're going to do. And then there's an evidence that you've reviewed quality control, say a management review step. That's also evidence that you have implemented quality control. And then once you have a quality control failure, what's your documentation and what's your follow-up? Are you able to demonstrate that you can handle quality control failures? And also, what are you doing to prevent quality control failures if you have too many of them? That's another type of tracking that you can do. Now we're at 5.1, more general elements. And this is where we start with that identification and traceability. I've alluded to that, talking about who does what, when, good manufacturing processes. Well, here is where the standards require it. For each critical step in the collection, the processing, the compatibility testing, and the transportation of blood and blood components, you shall have a mechanism to identify who performed the step and when it was performed. This is identification and traceability. Now, on traceability, there's another clause that you shall ensure all blood and blood components and your critical materials that you use in processing, as well as the laboratory samples that you're using, donor and patient records, that you've identified them and they're traceable. So this includes everything vein to vein. More on the general elements of process control. Now we're getting into general labeling requirements. 5.1.4.3. The blood bank or transfusion service shall have a labeling process, and this process shall include all these steps. You identify the original unit, any components, and any component modifications. You can't obscure the label, you have to identify them. You complete the required reviews that are necessary, then you attach the labels. So a labeling process must be defined and implemented as written. More on general elements. Process control is the largest area of these sets of standards. Talk about that inspection. You shall have a process to ensure that blood and blood components and services, they're inspected to verify that your requirements are met. And 5.1.6 is involved your handling, storage, and the transportation. You have to have a process to ensure that blood components, and services are handled, stored, and transported in a manner that prevents damage, limits deterioration, and meets requirements. So you must keep the product in temperature. It can't be damaged during either in your storage in your facility or during transportation to another facility. This is all process control, having controlled processes. Inventory management. We also have standards and clauses around inventory management. You must ensure that the appropriate segregation of all stored blood products, including autologous units. So you must segregate units that are not issued and ready for use, that they're still in process, they're either being manufactured or tested or separated from those units that are ready to be issued, that have been fully labeled. And you must segregate your autologous units. So you have to have this appropriate segregation so that someone doesn't get a unit that's not officially ready for use or not fully labeled and try to issue it. Usually you have many, many systems to prevent that, but this is the standard that requires that you segregate. For storage of blood and blood components, the temperature shall be recorded and monitored every 8 hours. So you must monitor the temperatures of your blood and blood components every 8 hours at a minimum. Then here's a transportation clause. Blood and blood components shall be inspected immediately before you pack them for shipment and or shipped for transfusion only, and they can only be issued and transported if specific requirements are met, your requirements. And your containers, those portable coolers, you need to qualify them to transport blood and blood components to ensure that they maintain the temperatures for the entire period that they are in use. So now some evidence on how you've implemented these standards. Well, you have your processes and your procedures that ensure blood and blood products and critical materials are taken care of in a safe manner. So those are your procedures. That's evidence that you've implemented the standard. You have your records to ensure that the identification and traceability of critical steps, you know, who collected what, when, that your records demonstrate that. That's another suggestion of evidence of implementation. And when you inspect these units and reagents, that you document you've inspected them, and that record is evidence that you've implemented. And then you have evidence that products are handled and stored and transported at safe temperatures. So you have temperature logs. That's another way of evidence that you've implemented those standards. Now we're going to get into collection and production of components. And these are standards 5.2 all the way through 5.7. And this is all involved with donor here. Donor education, your donor consent, your donor notification, care of your donors, how you're taking care of them while they're in your facilities, and that they have instructions post phlebotomy, and then post donation information you give them. And then there is a huge reference standard in the body of the fundamentals, and that gives you a reference standard for all the donor qualifications. And you also may have qualifications that are required by your competent authority. So you would put those qualifications in your policies and procedures as well. And then you have protection of the recipient and the donor. So how are you protecting the donor from adverse reactions, and then the recipient, your patient, and transfusion reactions? So these standards involve all those processes. So now we're talking, then you get into blood. Once you've qualified the donor, 5.6 gets into blood collection. And those are the methods that you're using, your procedures. What samples do you collect for laboratory tests? When do you collect them? How are they labeled? The standard involves that. Then we have requirements that are different for apheresis. Can I have everyone mute their line, please? Thank you. And then there is also standards surrounding therapeutic phlebotomy and apheresis. So let's translate what the standards around collection mean. Your donor must be provided with educational materials. The donor must give a written consent. The donor must be notified of abnormal results. Once you've tested their samples, if they have any abnormal results, they have to notify them so they can contact their clinician for treatment. The donor must be provided with post-donation instructions. You have to tell them what they need to do after they have given you their donation and once they leave your facility. And the donor must meet all your qualifications before you collect from them. And the patient and the donor must be protected. So what is some evidence that you've implemented these sets of standards? You have procedures for addressing donor information and donor qualification. You have a written documentation of what educational materials are you giving them so that they understand the collection process, what their consent means, what they're going to agree to as a donor. And then you get written consent. That's evidence. Once they sign their consent and you keep it, that's your evidence that you've implemented. And you have to have a defined process, written process for donor notification. How are you going to notify donors of test results if they need to be notified? Written documentation of that donor's history on the day of donation. So you're going to keep a record of their donor qualifications and their donor history. Whether it's manual on paper or electronic, you must have a record of it. And then you have to have a process to minimize adverse effects of the donation. How are you going to minimize any donor issues? Now we're going to look at preparation and processing. So we've done the collection piece, we've taken care of the donor, and now we're looking at processing of that blood and blood components. So we're going to ensure, you must ensure that the quality and safety of components, including your aliquots and pooled components, shall be used, or employed. We have clauses regarding the seal and the weld. And also, there's a very large reference table for preparing specific components. Reference standard 5.1.6a. And that gives you the requirements for storage, transportation, and expiration, and that table applies. So we use that table. So what are the components that these standards cover? They can cover whole blood, red blood cells, leukocyte reduced, frozen plasma, platelets, apheresis platelets, and apheresis platelets leukocyte reduced. So 5.7 covers all these preparation of these components. So I'm going to stop now and see if there are any questions on the quality control, the donor and collection, and also preparation of components with regards to the fundamental standards. I don't know if there's anything in the chat. Let me see. Not yet. All right. I'm just going to remind you again, go ahead and put your question. You can write them down in the chat. And if not, I'll have an opportunity to verbally ask them right now. Because there's a lot in process control. And now, all right, so now we're into testing. This is, you're doing the testing of your donor blood, set 5.8. So you must determine the ABO group, the RH type, and the tests that are intended to prevent disease by transmission by allogeneic donation. Your hepatitis B surface antigen, your HIV test, HCV, syphilis. So you must perform all those tests. And the methodology is intended to be done by you. These standards, the fundamental standards, do not require nucleic acid testing. They allow you to select your methodology for testing. You just need to do the required test. All right, and then you're going to be testing for high titer group O donations and quarantine. These standards cover quarantine and disposition of units from prior collection. So if you find on a donation that this donor now has a positive test result, you must go back and see if you have any units, frozen or not frozen, from a prior collection that are still in date, and then you must quarantine and dispose of them as well. So you have to have a process for that. Okay. All right, so what does all that mean? Well, donor testing includes ABO and RH and testing for disease transmission. You want to quarantine and dispose of prior units, and you shall follow your competent authority recommendations. So how you do that quarantine and disposition also follows your local and regional and national laws. What are some evidence that you've implemented these standards? Well, you have your written processes and procedures for your donor testing. You have records of the testing that was performed, and then you have records that you've quarantined and dispositioned prior units, should you find that a current donation has a positive test result. So now we're going to move into your final labeling and final inspections. You need to have a process that ensures all specified requirements have been met by the time you're at final labeling. So you have testing and acceptability criteria defined. Your component is physically inspected and accepted before you label. You must know if you have ABO and RH shall be compared to a historical type of vehicle, and you shall ensure blood and blood components for ineligible donors are quarantined. So you must quarantine those of the positive test result, and ineligible donors, ineligible for other reasons, either on the donor history questionnaire or another, or they've called back in and said they were unacceptable. After final label, after you have fixed that final label to the units, you have to verify that all the information is correct. So again, it's a verification and inspection process. And you're going to 5.10 is you're going to have to improve a process to ensure that blood components and test results meet specified requirements, including appearance, before your distribution or at issue. So again, that inspection for not only all the results are and all the information is accurate, but the appearance of that unit is acceptable. So what does that translate to? Specified requirements for labeling must be met at the final labeling. And documentation of labeling activities must occur and they must be reviewed. So you're going to have to document all your labeling activities and someone has to review that. And a final inspection is performed. That includes the label is accurate as well as the appearance of the unit. So what is some evidence for those two standards? You have a written process for final labeling. That's an evidence that you have that SOP for process, and that there is documentation at each step of the labeling process. So you've documented the test results were verified. The times of component prep are accurate. That the unit is acceptable before it's labeled. All those steps are documented, and that's some evidence that you've implemented the standard. Now, before I go into transfusion services, is there any particular questions related to anything previously? Anything that you would like me to answer? Okay, again, I remind you, you can put your questions in the chat, and you can also just keep them to the end and ask them when we're done for any of the sections of the standards. So now we're going to look at your transfusion service activities. 5.11 discusses your samples and requests. So you have to have identifying information for the patient and the sample. All that information shall correspond and be confirmed at the time of collection. And you have to use two independent identifiers. So you have to have, for example, the name of the patient and their medical record number. And that will correspond to the request for the request. And then when you label the sample, you put those same two identifiers on the sample, and you must confirm them, two independent identifiers. So then at 5.12 talks about serologic confirmation of donor, ABO, and RH, including autologous units. So you want to confirm the donor blood, that unit, you're going to confirm it in your transfusion service. And then 5.13 is pre-transfusion testing of patient blood. So there are certain tests that you're going to have to perform on the patient's own blood. Your ABO-RH, your antibody screen, a 3-part antibody screen, and all that testing has to be done on the patient sample, and then you're going to do compatibility testing. And you're going to select compatible and blood compatible units for the transfusion. You're going to perform the cross match. And then before you issue, again, you're doing that final inspection that everything is right. The requisition matches the patient's name, the patient number, the cross match, the unit, everything is confirmed, and that the unit is acceptable. And then you're going to go ahead and issue the blood and blood components. Now, if you have a discrepancy though, either at bedside or even before issue, how are you going to handle those discrepancies? All right. So now let's talk about more. There's more transfusion service activities. Transfusion service is a very complicated area. So there may be times when you have urgent requirements for blood and blood components. You haven't completed all your testing and they do want an emergency release. You have to have a procedure And your medical director is in charge of that and a sign off for times when this is appropriate, because there's too much need to wait for, say, the compatibility testing to be fully completed, or and the patient is in dire need of that unit. So that is determined between the medical director and the clinician. Then 5.21 has the administration of blood and blood components. And again, right here, this is a very important. You have to have written or documented consent for the recipient. They agree to the transfusion. And sometimes it's not the recipient, because the recipient can't make those decisions, but they have someone else in charge making their medical decisions, and they're giving consent. Medical record documentation. You have to have complete medical record documentation. Everything about that transfusion needs to get into the medical record. So what does that translate to? Requests and patient samples, including proper patient identification, are the important first steps to provide the correct product to the right patient every single time. And the patient testing is a process that includes the blood group and the type of the antibody screen and the cross match. So that is all the patient testing that must be completed. It's mandated. And the medical director of the blood bank is responsible for the products until they're transfused to the correct patient. So the blood bank does have ownership. Can you please mute your line? Evidence of implementation. You're going to need a written policy or procedure addressing each of these standards on the transfusion standards, transfusion activity standards. So again, that's your evidence. All those procedures, all those policies will be your evidence. You need to have documented records of all your testing that you do for the patient, any inspections that you're doing of the unit, and evidence at the administration side. You need to have evidence that is documented that they did their checks before they administered the unit to the patient. So now we're at the end of process control. And I'm going to stop and ask if there's any questions, because that was a big area, 5.0. It's all about the operations that you have at your either blood center, transfusion service, and it's a big, big area. So if there's any questions on any of those, on anything I talked about, we can stop now and I can answer them, or I can wait till the end. So I'll wait a few moments and see if you have any questions.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Yeah. So you talked about in the previous slide about the serological confirmation of the donor ABO and RHD group. So does that include the D6 confirmation as well, and at the hospital level? Is that something within the standard?
I'm not sure I'm understanding. What do you mean? The RH type? The week D. Yes, yes. You must perform week D testing. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Because otherwise, I'm going to go right to the standard on that. Because we also have other sets of standards at AABB. So let me hold on. Let me look at this testing. And yes, here it is. It's 513.2. RH type shall be determined with anti-D reagent. The test for week D is optional when testing the patient. So it is optional when testing the patient, because if they receive negative units, it's okay if they're a positive. So it is optional under the fundamental standards. It's not optional in the ABB larger book of standards, but yes, on 5.13.2, week D is optional for the patient, not for the donor. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Can I ask another question?
Yes, sure.
So for the confirmation of the ABO group, is the AABB, specify a specific method? Does it has to be like a, column method or solid phase, or it could be slide method, or?
No. Remember, remember, the method is chosen by you because it's the method is how you meet the goal. The standard says you must perform ABO group testing. How you do that testing is up to you. Now here, let me read you the entire standard. The ABO group shall be determined by testing with red cells with anti-A and anti-B reagents, and by testing the serum or plasma for expected antibodies with A1 and B reagents. If a discrepancy is detected and transfusion is necessary before resolution, only group O red blood cells shall be issued. So again, it tells you you must use anti-A and anti-B, but how you do that, what method, if the method is up to you. All right, did I answer your
Okay.
question?
Yes. Good. Thank you so much. Thank you.
All right, anything else?
बुला लेते हैं। नहीं,
Okay.
मैं उसको नहीं काम दूंगी। क्या
Can I
कर रहा
have everyone mute their lines, please? Thank you. All right, now we're going to go into your 6.0, the standard and quality system essential for documents and records. So you're going to have PPPs to ensure that documents are identified, reviewed, approved, and then you also need to retain them, and that your records are created and stored and archived in accordance with record retention policies. And we have policies in the standards, but also if you have stricter policies by your competent authority, you must adhere to those policies as well. But you can't do anything less than this AABB standards. So what does that translate to? You need a way to manage your documents. You need to have a standard format for your SOPs, your policies, your procedures. Only current versions are in use. You got to make sure you don't have any obsolete versions that some staff members may use and then maybe do something inappropriate. Current version is reviewed and approved before you use them. So you have a new SOP, you have to review and approve it before you put it into use. But then you must save older versions, and that retention time is in the table in the standards for document retention and record retention. So what's some evidence that you've implemented 6.0? Well, you have a master list of your documents. That master list includes all your policies, your processes, and your procedures, also your forms, because each form must be associated with a procedure, and your labels, any labels that you're using. Have that master list so you know what is the current version. You have a standardized format that you use, and you can demonstrate that. You have document version history, so you know each time a document is revised and re-implemented. You approve your SOPs before you implement them. You have to have a biannual, every 2 years review of your documentation, and that's written, and that review is, you can show that you've done your review and you have evidence. The documents that you're using, if you go out into the lab or into the donor area and you look at the documents they're using as SOPs, is that reflected in the current master list as what's approved to be in use? So you make sure that what is used is what you've approved. And then you have complete documentation for a selected product, service, or report. So you can show that here is from the source to the final disposition. I can show that entire process. That's evidence that you've implemented the standard. And that you're going to store your documents and records to preserve them. So you have adequate storage conditions. 6.2 talks about your records. We talked about your documents. Now let's talk about your records. Your records have to be complete. They have to be legible and indelible. So you aren't going to use gel pens that wash off, and no pencils on your records, any of your manual records. Your records must be confidential. They must be stored so that there's not access by somebody that shouldn't be looking at them. Records have to be traceable. So they're going to follow your product from the source to the final disposition. So again, who does what when? Good manufacturing practices. And your records reflect GMPs. Your donor and patient identifiers have to be unique. So your donor your donor number, your donor information number, your patient information number, they have to be unique. And that records must be created concurrently. That's again another principle of good manufacturing practices. You must document as you do the task. And any changes to records, because sometimes you find an error and you have to change them, but you have to have a process that controls that. And then the reference standard 6.2a talks about record retention policies, and that's also in the Book of Fundamentals. So now let's look at, we have some specific standards for electronic records. So you're going to have a process and procedure to support the management of computer systems. This supports those equipment standards because your computer system is considered a piece of equipment. And again, in documentation of your electronic records, because records can either be manual, electronic, or both. Preserve your record legibility and integrity for the entire retention period. Say you have to keep something for 10 years, it must be legible and intact for that whole 10-year period when it's being stored. Protect from accidental and unauthorized access, destruction, or modification. And you have to have a process that allows you to go retrieve the records. So you have to come in, you're doing an audit and you've got to look at the records of this particular donor or patient. You've got to be able to retrieve it and find it in a reasonable amount of time. Destruction of records. So you met times when it's time to destroy your records, the destruction shall be conducted in a manner that protects the confidential information of the record. You can't just put them in the regular trash for disposal if someone could read what's in that record. So you have to ensure confidentiality even until the record is destroyed. Now we're going to get into deviations, nonconformances, and adverse events. These are more of the quality system foundation. So you're going to have PPPs, processes, procedures, and policies to ensure that you capture an assessment, an investigation, and monitor of deviations. You're going to capture them and from meeting or failing to meet specified requirements. So these are going to happen. We're humans, we're not perfect, but you have to have a process that controls capturing them, evaluating them, reporting them, and trying to prevent them. So what does this translate to? These things do happen. We know them. What are we going to do? You need to be able to figure out the issue, maybe a root cause, determine if it's important, and if it's some deviations are more important than others, but you need to determine that importance. But you got to find out why it happened. Maybe that's the root cause. Determine if it is a symptom of a larger problem. Does this reflect on something else that's happening? Maybe multiple deviations. They might be a little bit different, but do they all point to the same particular problem? That's for you to investigate and understand. Someone must be responsible for viewing these results and deciding what you're going to do with them. You found it out. Now what are you going to do? And a verified issue must be reported when it's required. If it's required by your competent authority to report certain issues, then you must do it. So what's some evidence that you're implementing this, the implementation of this standard? Your people know what to do if an error is made or discovered. They know exactly what action to take. They have to be familiar with the procedure. Do they go to their supervisor? Do they write a form? Whatever you've determined, but they have to know what to do with an error when they've discovered it. That practice of what they're doing is reflected in your SOP. So your SOP says steps A, B, and C, and your staff do A, B, and C. Your responsibility for managing errors is defined. Who's responsible for managing this? They've been reported. Who's taking it to the next step to investigate, analyze, and decide a corrective action? Documentation of errors from the assessment, the investigation, the correction, and the follow-up. That's all evidence. If you've documented, that's evidence that you've implemented the standard. And this documentation that you collect matches what your SOP says on how you're going to do it. Again, you do what you say you're going to do. Now there's 7.1 is talking about the non-conformance area of this standard. So you can have non-conforming products, services, reports, and critical materials. And products and materials that don't meet your expectations are considered non-conforming. If they're in your control, they're still in the blood center or the blood bank, they must be prevented from being used. So you're going to have to quarantine them, whether they're a test reagent that's not producing test results under control. If they're a blood unit that has a positive test result, it has to be, and you would find out about it. Or if you see a product that is hemolysis, it begins hemolyzing and you don't know why. Those are all non-conforming products. Get them in your control, segregate them, and quarantine them. But if they're not in your control and you've already issued them, you get post-donation information. A donor called up and gives you information that says that unit might not be acceptable, is one example. You need to have a process to get them back into your control. And if they have gone to the patient and they're being transfused, the patient's physician has to be notified of this non-conformance. What's some evidence? You have a written process, the documentation of quarantine, retrieval, and recall. All those processes are evidence. And you have reports that you've notified a physician, you've notified a customer or a supplier. Those are your evidence that you're implementing 7.1. 7.3 talks about your adverse events related to transfusion. So you need to have a process for the administration of blood and blood components that includes recognizing, evaluating, and reporting of suspected transfusion-related adverse events. What's the evidence that you have that process? Recognition and the response to transfusion reactions. So your nursing staff must be trained on how to recognize a transfusion reaction. And you must define what are the signs and symptoms, what is indications for interruption or discontinuation of a transfusion, and the evaluation of that reaction. Both your lab staff and nursing must be trained and they must be competent. You got to have competence in nursing and competence in the lab that they understand a transfusion reaction. And your medical director must review. That's evidence of that you've implemented by the review of the medical director's documents. We're at 8, and that is looking at your internal and external assessments or audits, because audit equals assessment. So you're going to have your policies, processes, and procedures to ensure that internal and external assessments of your operations and your quality system. So you're going to evaluate your quality system and you're going to evaluate your operations, that they're scheduled and that you conduct them. And that the results of internal and external assessments, and an external will be an accrediting body, shall be reviewed by personnel having the responsibility for the area being assessed. So if my internal audit is on collections, then someone in the collections area must review that audit and take action. If it's in the lab, then it's someone from the lab. You want to make sure that the people doing these activities get to see their assessments or audits and they know them and can take action. So what does that translate to? It's important to look at what is really happening. You need to look at them. You don't want to wait till an external auditor comes in to find out what's happening. You need to stay ahead of it and you need to be doing your internal audits. Looking at your QC results isn't enough. You need to look at actual staff performing. You need to do a tracer, maybe from the beginning, from a collection of the donor all the way to transfusion. That's a good way of doing an audit. You look at everything associated with that particular donor and donor information number. So how are you going to do this? You want to assess both your operations and your quality system. How? Well, you can use, when you apply for the quality certificate, that self-assessment tool that you're going to be completing to fulfill the requirements for the quality certificate. That assessment tool is one way to assess both operations and quality, because it's going to look at all these standards that are on your operations, your process control, and your quality system. Another way, as I mentioned earlier, is your tracer method. Go ahead and assess from the particular donor information number to patient transfusion. So what are some evidence of those? Your written plan and your schedule that you've done them for internal assessments or audits. Plan and schedules have been followed. That's evidence. Here's your plan, there's your schedule, and you did it. Both operations and quality system are assessed and that they've reviewed them. Your management team, your management review is a good place to review your internal and external audits. And that you schedule external assessments. You know that you have an external agency that's going to come in and assess or audit you. 8.2 is utilization review. This is very important. If you're a transfusing facility, you shall monitor and evaluate your transfusion practices at your facility for all categories of blood and blood components. So what does that mean? Know that you're getting the right blood to the right patient for the right reason. People are being transfused for the right reason. So what's in evidence? You have a process that describes your utilization program, and then you document that program activities. You can have a transfusion committee as one evidence. How you do this is up to you, but you need to have a program that shows that your utilization of your blood and blood components has been reviewed. Now we're down to the second to the last standard, and this is process improvement. It's part of the quality system. You need to you need to have PPPs to collect data, to analyze that data, follow up on your issues that require corrective preventive action, including near miss. So you need to even track your near misses. What's that mean? Translation, look at your statistics and analyze for improvement. Your KPIs or your metrics, whatever you're using to review the activities of your facility. And then if you have corrective action, prove that it worked. You implement a corrective action, you go look and see it, evaluate after for the effectiveness. Did it work? Did we not have that problem or deviation occur again? Use your errors and complaints as your opportunities to do better. Because now we're not only tracking your errors, but any complaints that you get, you must track as well. So what's some evidence? As I mentioned, documentation of your complaints. They can be from donors, they can be from your clinicians, nursing staff. Then collect your data, show the data you're collecting. I want to show, what are my rates for infection, TTI infection rates for my test results. I want to look at those. I'm going to analyze my data. What does my analysis report show? You also that you do something with the data collected and analyzed. What actions are you going to take from learning about learning the data, and what problems are you resolving? Evaluate your effectiveness. Did your corrective action work as you expected it to? And again, I mentioned that management review. The management team can review your corrective actions, can review your KPIs. All that is evidence that you've implemented process improvement. The last standard I want to talk about this morning or this afternoon or evening for you is facilities and safety. So you're going to have policies, processes, and procedures to ensure the provision of safe environmental conditions. So you have to have a safe environment, and then you also have to safely discard blood and blood components. Those are two provisions in 10. What does that translate? So you have to have a safe work environment for your employees, for your donors, any volunteers, your patients, and your visitors. And blood components must be handled and disposed of safely. And again, these safety requirements are all you must follow your competent authority, because they're going to have rules and regulations that you must follow. And the standards require that you follow those rules of your competent authority. So what's some evidence? Well, you have a safety program that meets your local, provincial, and national regs. that you're going to record the monitoring of adherence to these standards and regs. So you're going to look to see if your safety plan was followed. Documentation and of a safe discard of blood and blood components. How did you document it? Do you have a manifest? Do you know the disposal methods? Do you know what was discarded and safely? You have to have evidence. So now I'm going to end this with a kind of a little bit of humor. This is the unwritten rules of quality systems. And we can say by translation, if it moves, you need to train it. That's people. If it doesn't move, piece of equipment, you want to calibrate it. And if it wasn't documented, it wasn't done. And the last summary I wanted to give you before we go to any questions was the review of the fundamental standards for blood collection and transfusion. I've gone through all the QSCs and standards and highlighted some of the clauses. I've defined quality and quality management system. I've provided a translation of the meaning of these standards, giving you some ideas of what they mean. I've given you examples of the evidence of implementation of the standards, that you would use those suggested evidence as you complete your self-assessment tool when you submit it for the quality certificate, because you know the quality certificate is based on these standards. And I wanted to show there's many, many ways to meet the intent. I had a great question on ABO grouping. How, and your methodology and how you do what you need to do is your choice. There are different ways to meet the standard, but the standards are your goal and they are the shall, and you must achieve your goal. How you do that is up to your facility and how you choose to do that. And you also must be in line with the local and the regional and national competent authority. So these are some references that I've used to prepare the information that we talked about today. And now I'm going to stop screen sharing and turn this over for questions. So I can see you.
Yeah, in the chat box, actually, I have put the question.
All right.
In case of digital records, when we are using like software, so we get all the reports like the compatibility report and the blood grouping report on the software in the computer. So how are digital signatures, user IDs,
Yes.
passwords given, are they okay?
If you're talking about a digital signature being acceptable, yes. Electronic records and your computer system is very much, it's a great tool to keep you in compliance and under regulation. Yes, what you would need to probably have is a separate, if you see the digital signature, you have to have some place that says says who that person is. How you do it, if it's embedded in your electronic system. But then remember, if you have to go and use a manual system because your electronic system is not functioning, that you have a manual process for a backup in case you need it. And that you test that manual process and make sure that you can have a backup. That's always the check of a check that we would require in our quality system.
And who can do the internal assessments? Like, can we, usually internal audits, like they are one of the persons inside the blood center can do. But can we do the internal assessments? Can we ask some of our colleagues from another blood center of the city, maybe? Can we get it done?
Well, I would consider that as an external assessment because it's someone outside of your facility. It may not be an accrediting body, but sure, you could have if that's a process you'd like to use to have a fresh set of eyes come in and you might do your have someone come in and you exchange. That's perfectly acceptable. Again, how you do them is up to you, but it needs to follow some written process that you say, we're going to do this. And then you document it and then you do it. But again, that's a methodology of how you get the job done and you have the choice.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Now,
that was very extensive and informative. Anybody else? Dr. Sadhna, would you like to add something or? Navjot sir, Ananda sir.
I am here. I can speak a little bit, but before me, I take Anand. He's quiet for some time. Is there? Anand is not here.
Yeah.
Okay, he must be dropped out. Now there's a problem.
Dr. Kazi is there.
Yeah, yeah.
Kazi Mumtaz. I can see her name from Bangladesh.
Yes, I'm here, but I was fasting today, so I have
Oh,
joined
yes.
little later. So maybe halfway I joined. So
Okay. Is it that finish? It is the end of this program or something something else?
We can have question answer session, sir.
Yeah. Question answer. Then I'll take another 2 minutes. Christian, over to you.
All right, well, if there's no questions, I really wanted to stress that the fundamental standards are available free, and I hope you downloaded them from the AABB website. These standards are available to anyone that wants to download them and use them in your facility. The Quality Certificate Program is based on these standards. And these standards, as I mentioned, were developed in a consensus committee. It was the Global Standards Committee at AABB, and they're made up with very many members from all around the world that are experts in blood transfusion. And this committee is active, and it still works today, because what we do is, as our facilities that are in the quality certificate program that have gone through it and achieved the certificate, we ask for feedback from those facilities, because we want to know if there's any feedback on a standard that might need clarification, if they feel something's incomplete. We take that feedback at AABB, and that goes to the committee, and they take all that into consideration when they do the next version. And the next version probably will come out next year. And that version will include any updates, any new regulations that have occurred that we need to include in our standards, any clarification. We also have a mechanism if we need to put something in immediately, say there's something in the transfusion world that needs an immediate attention, we have a process at AABB to do a bulletin. So the first association bulletin for the fundamentals is 97-4, and that bulletin was also included. And then when we do the next round of revision, any of the bulletin requirements then can get put in. I'd also like you to understand that, again, I mentioned you must follow your own local laws and your regulations. And we use that term when you see in the standards specified requirements. That means that would be your local laws and any requirements that you would need to adhere to. And as Dr. Chowdhury so aptly put out, when you go through these standards, you will see a pen symbol, and that also gives you a clue that you need to have a documented evidence to show that you've implemented. And the first one, when you go through the standards under 1.0 organization, the first pen you would see is under management reviews. And those management reviews require minutes, a schedule, and that you adhere to the schedule. So that is another way that you would have evidence that you've implemented the standards. So as you go through all the standards, you will see pens like under quality control, you need a documented quality control program. And at any time you go look at these standards and you have any questions, you can always reach me. My email address I will put in the chat. So now I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Chowdhury, for some words.
Thank you, Christine. First, thanks for your time. And it is a joint journey for all of us. This was a special program for our AATM member who have AATM country chapters who have shown their interest so that they want to go for AABB quality certificate. That's why it was targeted. It was specially for Mongolia, and you can see almost 6-7 personnel. Including the chief,
Dr. Namzil. He has joined here. It shows their commitment, and there are members, key people from Nepal, Oman, and Sri Lanka. So I think it will be helpful for all of you. And there are one announcement we want to make. We are actually starting a active support system, hand-holding system from AATM to the member countries. And we are already in discussion with WHO, and they are going to give the support if any country in Asian countries, that is a share of countries, they want this type of support. It will be a hand-holding program, and we are going to give this support to Nepal, and we are already in discussion. And I'm actually writing the proposal for them, and it will go to them, and from them it will go to the WHO for funding. So the same procedure you can also follow from Bangladesh. You can also follow from Sri Lanka, because you are in the CRO countries. CRO is already sensitized. They can do it. However, Oman is in AMRO, as well as Mongolia is in WIPRO. You can talk to your country, WHO representative in your country. If they have, they can support you. The AATM support is in two types. It will be a complete hand-holding. Even if you think that you cannot write some documents, and in this particular program, it will be hand-holding, even dictating or showing you how to write the document, and even in some cases showing or helping you to produce a document. So it is active, and this will be under a complete package. But at this moment, I cannot tell you everything, because this is under discussion. So before I close down, I request all of you, because I have seen all the centers except Oman that I have not visited yet. So I know that, and I have heard this is one of the best center, and it is doable. That's what we say. It is not expensive. It is quite reasonable. It is just 4,500. It is for 2 years, and no additional payment in between. Having saying that, let us start it, and whoever wants to go for AATM active hand-holding, then they can go it. But otherwise, if you think that you want to need immediate helping, that AATM working group in quality is already there, where Dr. Nidhi, Dr. Sadhana, as well as Dr. Kazi Huda, they are the chair and co-chair. They can also help you. But that helping will be probably mainly, advocacy and helping you in some level. But let us go ahead. And I think this is going to help you to develop document, as well as come in contact with us, AATM Quality Working Group, or us as your active holding. Over to you, Dr. Nidhi.
Yes, so I have in the chat box, I have put the email ID. So anybody who has some queries, or they want to have, we can answer if we are able to. Otherwise, we'll refer it to Christine. Oh,
yeah.
The email ID I have, yeah. So they can just email.
Can you request some of the participant to, it is like a direct feedback. It is like Dr. Namjil. He's the chief of Mongolian National Blood Transfusion Center. Dr. Namjil, you are still here?
Yes, he's there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you, Dr. Christine. This your very informative lecture for us. We have interest to get the AB certificate. So yeah, I mentioned that. So the problem is that foundation. So now we have some ideas But of course, we have some suggestion from some company who is the supplied us some regions. So we have find some way to get some found from outside source. So yeah, we will give our email address for you, Dr. Sadna. So that actually it is our secretary is the Dr. Solongo, who's the also participating here. So she will give that all email address from our staffs. So thank you.
Thank you,
for-
Dr. Namjan. Yeah, thank you. And thanks for spending the whole lectures with us. Dr. Dhamika from Sri Lanka, you are one of the office bearers of the AATM chapters. Your feedback, please.
Thank you, Dr. Christine. So this is actually very interesting and very informative lecture. It's a very good this is the foundation for improving the quality services, transfusion service in our country. So that most of the steps that we already implemented, but some steps, important points we came to know that we missed that, especially in the documentations and the maintenance of the that records. So that is very important. We will try to get the ABB certificate for the Sri Lankan Blood Service by your help in the AATM and the ABB. Thank you very much, madam. Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury.
Yeah, Dr. Dhamika, one suggestion is from our side. That's the way we are going forward with Nepal. You can also go forward similarly, because if we can give a proposal to you, it maybe end of this month or maybe beginning of next month, so that you can submit to you can submit to your WR, like we have submitted the report or the proposal for ECOWAS, regional ECOWAS. The same route you have to follow, and probably you will get the support not only for the national center. You will get for I do not know, I mean, which center you want to include, but you can get for around 3-4 centers. That is the easy way to do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Already, that's mean you are talking about the ECOWAS for the TTI testing.
No, that is different. I'm saying that that AABB quality certificate, you will get a active support from AATM, and that includes the fees you have to pay to AABB. It will be supported by WHO. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Okay. We'll select our main centers, including the National Blood Center and other main centers in the regional blood centers.
Yeah.
Few, especially the Kandy and my center is Anuradhapura. This is the main centers in the country. Will do the proposal. We prepare the proposal and submit. Yeah.
That you can discuss one-to-one in the Sri Lankan, AATM Sri Lankan chapter. Whenever you are ready, you can discuss with the director and get back to us. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I will fail my duty if I do not call Dr. Rekha from Nepal. I am repeatedly mentioning Nepal, but Dr. Rekha, please.
Thank you, Dr. Chowdhury sir. Definitely, we from all Nepalese participants would like to thank entire team of AATM and even ma'am as well for such a helpful and extensive presentation as well. As Chowdhury sir has said, we are on the process of hand-holding help from AATM as such. For that one, we have to forward through Ministry of Health and Population, and still we have to put up those queries in our meeting. Once it get approved, then we'll get back to you, sir, and for that process. And apart from that one, we haven't yet started these processes, not even at a single blood bank. So we are very much keen to have this process as soon as possible. Actually, we are very much happy to have these sorts of presentations and that input from the other parts as well. And thank you once again, Chaudhary sir and entire team of AATM and ma'am as well. Thank you.
Thanks. And I cannot see Dr. Sadia. You are here from Oman. Dr. Sadia, you are here. Okay, I think she logged off. Or anybody from this team, you want any questions to Christine or Dr. Nidhi or us? Okay, I think no more question, Nidhi. Over to you.
So thank you, Christine, once again. And for this, it is again a revision for me. So it's good. And as
before we
Dr. Chaudhary told me last week, why not I go for my center? So that's what he has told me. So I'm going to work on it too.
Yeah, why everybody should not, switch on their video so that we can take a snap, Everybody, would you like to open your video that we can take a snap that becomes documentation? And
documentation.
Yeah, Christine has said you about the documentation. Anybody, everybody, you can open your video. Okay, it's good, but still few more people, they have not opened the video. I know I am not photogenic. Still,
actually, we are all fasting. Yeah, actually,
oh,
Dr.
yeah.
Chaudhary, we're all fasting. I'm in the kitchen, but the moment you said, I was like, yes, okay. But
Okay.
thank you so much for this, excellent view. Christine, thank you. What a lovely training. It reminded me of my trainings at AABB, Thank you so much.
Okay. Okay, doctor, then the other people are not opening because they may be busy with some other thing. So anybody or one more shot, or we'll close it down here. Okay. Dhamika is there. Dhamika just came in the screen. Okay. Okay. Okay, we'll take, I have taken a shot already.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. We'll leave now. Thank you, Christine.
Thanks
Thanks for your time again.
Thank you.
Have a nice day. Bye.
Bye, madam.